We're finally done with the fall semester, and so I'm going from professor mode now to preaching mode as we get ready for Christmas, and it's the fourth Sunday of Advent. I'm actually enjoying a few days of vacation, but I thought I'd share with you a few new things I learned how to do on Verbum that especially help us with preaching. So let's suppose we're going to give a homily for these readings for the fourth Sunday of Advent. I've turned Verbum on. As you can see, I've got a blank screen. I could have my home screen on if I wanted to, but I usually don't start with the home screen, so we'll just pretend it's not there. So what do? First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my library to find the readings, and I could enter in, as you can see I did automatically here, I just searched it, Catholic Daily Readings. This is going to be our lectionary, so we'll just click on that, and it will come up, and I will scroll down to the day. I could also, you could just put in the date if I wanted to, December 20th, that's Sunday, so we're looking at the Sunday readings. You'll notice here there's a hyperlink to the Roman Missal, which I have on Verbum. You have to buy it separately as a resource, but if you have the Roman Missal in your Verbum package, it's very handy because you can also look at the prayers that are associated with the fourth Sunday of Advent. But for our purposes, let's just look at the main scripture readings. So what's nice here is that I get a glimpse of the English of all of these readings. And so one of the things I'm going to notice as I do all of this is that this theme of God making promises is a salient theme. God makes a promise to David here in the first reading. Then in the responsorial psalm, an exilic psalmist, a psalmist who is suffering, wonders what has been made of the promise that God just made to David. So that's an interesting relationship we have between the first reading and the responsorial psalm. The second reading here is significant because it talks about how God's promises have been made known through the prophetic writings. Honestly, this second reading doesn't do a lot for me, so I'm going to preach on the first reading and the gospel, and then this gospel is what we call the Annunciation in the Catholic tradition. The angel Gabriel comes to Mary in Nazareth. Before we go into how to build the homily here using Verbum's tools, I want to talk a little bit about a neat tool here in Verbum that helps us make connections between the Old Testament and the New Testament. I like to use this both in class as well as in homily preparation. So with this, I'm just going to keep it where it is for right now. I'm going to go to my Tools menu, and I am going to scroll down here in Interactive Media. There's a very helpful one called New Testament Use of the Old Testament. New Testament Use of the Old Testament. This tool is going to help us with intertextuality. Intertextuality is a term that's used not just in biblical studies, but in all literary studies today that describes how a later author uses an earlier author's ideas. For example, and this is my favorite example of this, just as the 1999 movie 10 Things I Hate About You is built on William Shakespeare's The Taming of the Shrew, new authors take old ideas and then repackage them for a new purpose. We see the same sort of thing in the Bible. New Testament authors, the inspired authors of the New Testament books, know about the Old Testament. They take it for granted, indeed, and so we shouldn't be surprised that they quote, cite, and then even more broadly, echo or allude to the Old Testament. And so this tool that we have right here helps us identify hypotexts and hypertexts. A hypotext is an earlier text, an older text being used in a later text, whereas a hypertext is the newer text that is using an older text. You can see here the default has these references sorted in New Testament canonical order. But suppose I want to put them in Old Testament canonical order. Suppose I'm doing research on the Old Testament and I want to see how Old Testament books are used later in the New Testament. I just click on Source, and now it starts with Genesis 1:1, shows how Hebrews chapter 11 verse 3 alludes to the first verse of the Bible. And we can see here 2 Corinthians 4:6, I wrote my doctoral dissertation on this passage, alludes to Genesis chapter 1 verse 3. So I could, if I want to, scroll down going through Old Testament canonical order, or better, I can use, here on the left side, I can use the source book. You can see Isaiah has the most references in the New Testament. New Testament authors refer to Isaiah more than any other book. Psalms is a close second, and then Exodus and Genesis, much more distant third and fourth, and it goes down from there. But you can see, if I click on more, books both proto-canonical and deuterocanonical. You can see Wisdom of Solomon is a deuterocanonical book, apocryphal in the Protestant tradition, are alluded to in the New Testament. But for our purposes, getting back to this homily that I'm working on, I'm interested in how does this gospel from Luke refer to the Old Testament. So I'm going to click on Luke here, and I'm going to click back on New Testament so that way it's in the order of Luke's gospel. So you can see it starts with Luke chapter 1, verse 6, but that's not in our gospel. So let's scroll down here to Luke 26 through 38. And my first example here, you can see, scroll up, so you can see my first example within our gospel passage for this Sunday is Luke 1:31, which alludes to Judges 13:3. So this is the conception of Jesus. Judges 13:3 refers to the conception of the judge Samson. Luke 1:31 also parallels with Isaiah 7:14, the famous Emmanuel passage. But here's a really interesting one. Luke 1:32 parallels with 2 Samuel 7:12 through 13, aka our first reading at this Mass. And then Luke 1:32 parallels with 2 Samuel 7:16, also part of our first reading for this Mass. So I'm going to put that in my mind and know I want to draw a connection between this gospel with this first reading. And you can see also, nothing will be impossible for God parallels the announcement of Isaac's birth in Genesis chapter 18, verse 14. So right now, as I'm preparing my homily, I'm gathering ideas. And once they've marinated a little bit in my mind, I'm ready to start preparing a draft of the homily. And there's a number of ways we can do this, but Verbum offers us some helpful tools. So I'm finished using the New Testament use of the Old Testament tool, so I'm going to get rid of that. I'm going to take out my New American Bible. Again, in prior videos, you can see I've created shortcuts for these frequently used sources. So I'm going to open up the New American Bible because it's the translation we use at Mass. And then I'm also going to open up the Nestle Allen Greek New Testament. I always want to have the original language Bible. Even with my students who don't know any Greek, I think it's always good to have the Greek open just so that way we can remember that the inspired word is in the original language. It's not the translation, it's the original. So we're going to go to Luke 1:26. So this is our reading, and because I've got my link set here, link set A, the New American Bible and the Greek will always remain in sync. Now I'm ready to start preparing a homily. One thing I can do to do that, I can go to my Tools menu here, and I can choose this Homily Builder. The Homily Builder, it's a very helpful way, and I'm going to show you why. It's a very helpful way to construct a homily. If you don't see a shortcut for it here, all you have to do is enter the words Homily Builder up here in the search bar, and it will come up for you. And you open it up, you have an untitled homily. You'll want to give your homily a title, and then you'll see it automatically defaults with heading 1. You'll want to put in some subheadings, and you can see you can also enter in all sorts of ideas you have about your homily. What are your topics? What are you going to be preaching on? Private notes, pretty much anything you want you can stick in here. As opposed to starting from scratch, I'm going to show you a homily I've already written on these readings. Previously written work comes under the Docs menu. So I'm going to come under my Docs menu here, and you can see Fourth Sunday of Advent B, the Promises of the Lord. This is a homily I already wrote for these readings. So let me open it up for you. Incidentally, a link to this entire homily is in the description of this YouTube video, so feel free to click on it if you want to see the finished product. But you'll notice here, I've got my title of my homily, Fourth Sunday of Advent. It's year B in the lectionary cycle, and I'm calling this The Promises of the Lord. My homily is going to be about the promises of the Lord. I click this I button right here. You can see Verbum does a lot of things very helpful for me. It tells me how long my homily is, 1,967 words, which it estimates at about 16 minutes. This is helpful if you're in a situation where time is of the essence. Now, as you're going to see, I've got a couple of block quotes in this homily that I don't actually intend to read when I'm delivering this homily, so the real homily is actually shorter than that, but it gives me some flexibility. Again, every church is different in terms of how long the preaching ought to last, but it's helpful to have a reasonable estimate being given here. You can see in the About menu, this for me is not part of a homily series, though I could do that if I wanted. As I wrote this homily, I came up with different topics that I'm going to address. Promises is the main topic, but we're going to talk about Mary. We're going to talk about discipleship. Also, I'm going to say something about fideism, which is something that is bad, that we should avoid as Christians. We'll talk about the true nature of Christian faith. We'll talk a little bit about covenant. We can also mention David as an important figure here. So you can see I type in the word David, and it'll come up here. I can choose David, man commander. It's that one. so I can add more topics as I think of them. Here are the two main passages I'm going to preach on, Luke 1:26 through 38 and 2 Samuel 7:1 through 17. I'm going to talk about the entire pericope, not just the verses that we read in the lectionary. You'll remember when we looked at our lectionary, I'm going to scroll back up here, the lectionary sometimes, for the sake of time, eliminates certain verses. One thing I always recommend for my students, read the verses that the lectionary omits. It will supply valuable context that you'll want to talk about sometimes in your homilies, and you're going to see I'm going to do that here. Also, a passage I should include here, Psalm 89, the responsorial psalm, is a beautiful psalm, but it's a difficult one, so we're going to talk about that. And I give a short little description. Mary and David trust in God's promises, do we? That's a very short, concise statement. I always tell people I want to be able to say in 10 words or less, what's the rhetorical goal of my homily? My homily's goal is to inspire the congregation to, and then I want no more than 10 more words after that. It should be that clear. If I can't do that, then my homily's too complicated and it's disjointed and I need to do something to make it clearer. You can see, this is my homily. I'm doing this tomorrow, Sunday. In reality, I'm not actually preaching this homily. I'm enjoying a little bit of a respite. I'm not in a church this weekend, but I have my first assignment in mind. I was visiting my first assignment this past week, and so I've got that parish in mind, but I could put that here. I could even add an occasion if I'm going to preach this multiple times. My audience is a general adult and liturgically fourth Sunday of Advent during the season of Advent in year B. So having finished all of that, we can unclick the I button here. When I click on these words introduction, you'll see there's a style up here. This works a lot like Microsoft Word's styles menu. It's very important to insert headings because when I click the hamburger menu, it's going to allow me to go to the various places in my homily, which is very, very handy. Moreover, Verbum has this handy tool, and again, not that I would always use this for ordinary Sunday preaching, but I might use this same tool if I were teaching in a classroom or giving an RCIA session or some other kind of session for a specialized audience. It'll prepare handouts for me, and it will organize these handouts based on these headings. Indeed, I'll even have discussion questions. We'll talk about how to prepare those. So I can edit my text. I can get rid of the hamburger menu here. And I'm going to begin my homily with this introduction, and you'll notice this is in blue. What I've done here is I highlighted this and I clicked this button, the include in question. So if I were delivering this talk, suppose it's not a general Sunday homily, suppose it's in a more specialized group, say on a retreat or for the RCIA or for some youth group, whatever, I could click that button and Verbum's going to produce for me a set of questions, discussion questions for groups to talk about after the fact. It may not even be a bad idea more generally to post on the parish website some ongoing discussion questions that not only am I preaching, I'm inviting the people of God to continue to think about the Word of God as they go through their week. So you can see as we go through this, I like to construct my homilies in bullet points. Some people like paragraphs. I'm not one of them. I like bullet points. You'll notice I even mark when I'm saying something that's ironic. I do that there. Again, more questions that I'm asking the congregation to just get involved with the reading. Get involved with what did we just hear in the Word of God. What was Mary doing in Nazareth when the angel came to her? We have to imagine for a second. St. Luke doesn't bother to tell us. Given that she was immaculately conceived, this is a good opportunity for me as a Catholic priest to remind the people of what we believe about the Immaculate Conception. But given that she was immaculately conceived, what did she already understand about her life's mission? Clearly not everything, because we're told that she's troubled, she's perplexed by this greeting. One of the nice things with Verbum is that I don't have to type this in the Greek. All I have to do is highlight it, copy it, Control-C, and then I can Control-V, paste it here into my homily. One other nice thing is that as I'm thinking and organizing my thoughts and I make connections with other passages in the Bible, when I type in a passage like I did with Luke 2:19 here, it will automatically hyperlink it, will Verbum, such that when I hover over it, the verse will automatically come up and I can click on it and my Bible will automatically go there. So you can see I've already written this homily, and I like to organize certain things in series of 2 or 3. It's a good rhetorical tool. It makes things memorable. So here I'm highlighting how Mary gives us an example of discipleship. I say she does 3 things in this gospel. She listens. Again, I highlighted this, and then I click this button up here, which adds it to my handout. She listens. So Mary listens, then she questions. And this is where I talk about fideism. Fideism is bad. It's far too common, but it's bad. And then finally, she believes and puts herself at the Lord's service. And you can see I include a nice block quote here. When Mary says, "I am the handmaid of the Lord," that is, I am the female slave of the Lord, we can see that she means a lot. She's incorporating a very vivid image that we often gloss over. I have a nice block quote here from the Anchor Bible Dictionary on slavery. I'm not going to read that out loud in the homily, but if I'm producing a handout or I'm going to put something on the parish website, it might be good to give this further information for interested people in my congregation. Then I've planned my transition, and then major point number 2. We're going to talk about how David, 1,000 years before Mary, also trusts in God's promise. And those of you who have seen my videos on 2 Samuel and 1 Kings will recognize some of this material, some of the fun details about how God does not really want a house, and how David is only a so-so kind of character in the books of Samuel and Kings. I'm not going to bore you with all of that right now. We're going to talk a little bit about the Davidic covenant, a major concept that comes up in this reading. And I explain that, and again, another block quote that explains more on what makes the Davidic covenant unique from what we see with Moses in the Old Testament. Again, this is not something I would want to get into with my entire congregation. It would be a little too much inside baseball, but for certain people in my congregation, they would be edified by this. So I want to include this information in something that I would publish either online or perhaps even prepare written handouts. You'll notice I can use bold to emphasize certain points, the scandal that we see in Psalm 89. And so I point out here, David's example teaches us 2 things. I think I'm going to number these, number 1 and number 2. And I'm going to actually move that back 1 and move that back 1 so that they're numbered as 1 and 2. Then I'm going to add these to my handouts. So I click Include in Handout, and they turn blue. So they'll show up in my handouts. And then this last part of the homily, and again, you can see them right here. I like all of my subpoints to have a uniform form. So Mary, surprised by Gabriel, she trusts in God's promise. Then David, surprised by Nathan, the prophet, he trusts in God's promise. Christians today, us, battered by 2020, we trust in God's promises. And so I'm getting into my last major movement where I'm bringing the readings back home to us. And again, I've got a bunch of questions here. I'm going to highlight all of these questions that I'm asking, and I'm going to add them to my list of discussion questions, and they turn blue. As an aside, I love mentioning historical little factoids. These are ways you can draw attention to people who may have interests that go outside of the life of the church. I like a little allusion here to the election of Rutherford B. Hayes in 1876, just to show that as crazy as we think the election of 2020 was, it has in fact been crazier in American history. That's an aside. Do we still trust in God's promises? Let's ask that question. Okay, and I get through the rest of my homily. And there we are. And I've got 2 more questions that I want to put in my list of questions. If I click Handout, here you can see I've created a little Reader's Digest version along with the full block quote based on what I've added to these handouts that would be suitable for distribution if I wanted to. Then I've got a list of questions, same thing. Questions that I want the congregation asking themselves as we go through the various parts of the homily. And if I wanted, I could add a few more under each of the subheadings, but it shows that the homily has a planned structure to it. If I come back over here and hit the text button, you can see I've got everything that I've prepared for the homily except for the block quotes. If I wanted, I could just hit publish, export it, and I've got a nice little PDF of my homily. I could just print this out and leave this on the ambo for me if I wanted. That's one option. Could also post it online. If we have a Verbum account, you can post it to Faithlife's service. That also works. You can export it as a PowerPoint. One thing I also like here, you can share it publicly if you want, and it will even generate a nice little URL for me. Also, when I'm delivering my homily, if I hit the preach button, it will take my homily, Verbum, and it will post it on this website, which has some nifty little features. And this is helpful not only if you're preaching, but I think even more when you're teaching and time is of the essence. You can set a time limit for yourself. So I start with 15 minutes, but if you're teaching a 50-minute class, you could have it go 50 minutes, 30 minutes, 15 minutes, 12 minutes, do whatever you want, and it will flash warnings for you. It'll turn yellow when you're down to 2 and 1 minute, and then it will turn red when you have run out of time. So I'm going to leave mine here at 15 minutes, and when I'm preaching, I can just hit start the timer. There's also a number of different options for how you display it, but this is a handy way to have your information come up while you're preaching so that the people of God are not looking at the top of your head. If you're like me and you don't have any hair anymore, it gives them an opportunity to hear what you're saying and look at your nice smiling face rather than the top of your head, which is glancing down at papers. So you can see Verbum can help us a lot with our preaching, our teaching, as well as our study of the sacred text. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, I would urge you to hit subscribe so that way you can stay up to date with all the cool stuff we're doing at St. Vincent de Paul Regional Seminary. Until we meet again, read well and pray well.